You started already?
Yeah.
Hello everybody, my name is Matteo. This is my TED Talk about my journey with diabetes. The way people define themselves all matter the way you want to be seen. As an athlete, my body is what defines me. I need to be strong, quick, and unstoppable. But life is going to throw obstacles at you, and you can either do one of two things. You can either run and let these obstacles take you over, or you can do two, which is to take the obstacle head on, and you can control it the way that you want. For me, that obstacle is type 1 diabetes. In a recent study done by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, over 100 million people in the United States have diabetes or prediabetes. So when I tell you that I am a type 1 diabetic, it might not come as a shock to you. Type 1 diabetes is a hereditary condition, meaning that it runs in my family, and that I had the antibodies for type 1 diabetes all along, but something in my life triggered it, which is why I didn't get diagnosed until later in life. Whereas type 2 diabetes mainly stems from developing over poor eating habits and poor lifestyle choices. It was a big bump in the road for me, but my diabetes is not what defines me as a person. So it was my sophomore year of high school. I was on vacation with my family when we discovered something was up. We were in San Francisco for a marathon that my mom was running. During the course of 2 months, I had lost over 20 pounds, and I was around 6 foot, 130 at the time. Just to put that in perspective, I'm 6'5" now, 220 pounds. Though through the process of finding out that I had diabetes, I was put through a gnarly wave of symptoms. I displayed all the symptoms that a normal pre-diabetic patient had, but mine were much more severe. I had constant dehydration, major weight loss, extreme hunger, major fatigue. I was throwing up constantly, and irritability. Just to put it in perspective, every night I would probably wake up around 5 times during the night, go to the bathroom 5 times, and then chug about 7 or 8 water bottles. My body, for all instances and purposes, was rebelling against me. Now, this picture was taken 2 weeks before I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. As you can see, I'm noticeably sick looking. It was the skinniest that I had ever been. And 2 weeks after this, I was rushed to the hospital where I stayed in emergency care for 2 weeks, where I had to go through numerous tests and stay there to stabilize my sugars to make sure that my symptoms didn't get even worse. Once I had been officially diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, they began discussing all of the complications that were associated with my illness. This is what really freaked me out. I found out that people with diabetes are more prone to cardiovascular disease, nerve damage, amputated limbs, and also blindness, among other things. This made me think of my grandma, who is right here in the picture, who is someone that was very close to me, who also had diabetes. During her life, she had suffered from complications from diabetes that led to her getting her right foot amputated. Now at this point, I was super scared. I would always think to myself, would I even live past 40 years old? But what might come as a shock to you was what scared me even more was the fact that I might not be able to continue playing sports. My body was a machine. I thought it was a fine-tuned machine, to be honest, until that point. This huge aspect of my life had been taken away from me, and I had to step away from my athletic career for a while. It was truly one of the hardest times for me, and at one point I even pondered the thought that I might not even ever play sports again. I was forced to build a new relationship with my body and build a new foundation of trust between us. Though for some reason, after I was diagnosed, I began to feel like an outcast, kind of. I would always think, well, none of my friends have diabetes, so why do I have it? I didn't want anyone to know about my condition, and I kept it that way. I proceeded to keep to myself for a while. I would spend numerous days just by myself, eating lunch by myself, not talking to anyone, just sheltering myself away from everyone, because I didn't want them to know that I felt like a weirdo about it. It was another very low point in my life. But what made me think was, what does this do good for me? What is sulking and feeling bad for myself gonna do? Like, it's not gonna change anything for it. So I just thought, oh well, I'm just gonna have to adjust to this new life that I have. Things like counting carbohydrates, everything that I would eat, I became very familiar with the educational facts on the back. Like, this became my best friend. And also 3 a.m. wake-up calls every morning just to make sure my blood sugar didn't affect me while I was asleep. And one of the biggest things was adjusting to a totally new diet. The fact that I couldn't eat all the foods that I once loved, but I had to eat the foods that my body needed. Though after this I became optimistic. I began reaching out to people with diabetes and listening to their stories and comparing it to my experience. Nobody will ever know how much this helped me, hearing other people's experience, making me feel not alone. And soon after that, I became an advocate for type 1 diabetes, going to fundraisers and doing many things like that. I even began going talking to other people and kids especially to help them by telling them my experience and showing them that it's going to be fine and that they're not alone. I just said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to let my condition slow me down at all. I eventually came back to sports, the one thing that gave me so much happiness that had been taken from me so abruptly. I eventually won County Athlete of the Year and given an opportunity to play college football. I began my college career at a junior college in Monterey by the name of Monterey Peninsula, and I did well enough there where I got a chance to come to USD to play football as well. This was one of the most proud moments of my life because I felt that I was controlling diabetes and it wasn't controlling me. I then began to accept that this big part of my life, and I just had to deal with it. My life had just began to be fully adjusted to this new aspect, and I never looked back after that. I began to take better care of my body and do things that were going to ultimately benefit myself later in life. I learned a lot through this experience though. I learned that I'm a lot stronger than the kid who was first diagnosed. And this was the kind of courage that I needed, and that allowed me to never get discouraged from this part of my life again, and I never let it slow me down. Though through this whole experience, I realized that it ultimately wasn't just about my new life with type 1 diabetes. That it was about the obstacles that we face in life, and that we are in the face of these obstacles, and I learned that you can either run from it or run over it, and live your best life possible. And that's what I chose to do. I chose to run over diabetes and live the best life that I can. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. Thank you very much.
Yeah.